Hello guys, and welcome back to another video, and we are back working on the BMW N47 engine once again. And today I'm going to be doing the swirl flap delete. So I have the swirl flap delete kit that I'm going to be installing. Now I just want to go out there and say first of all that this is something that I do not recommend if it does not need doing. So I've made a whole video explaining essentially that the N series engines, so the N47 and the N57, the swirl flaps are a different design to those of the M47 and the M57. It's not actually the swirl flaps themselves that fail on the N series engines, it is the swirl flap rod. So essentially, if you don't have excessive play in the rod itself, then you should be good to go. You know, you should be good with the swirl flaps still in place, and you shouldn't really have any issues with the swirl flaps themselves. Now, with that being said, I've actually noticed an issue. It's kind of been around for a bit of time now. The issue lies at the front of the intake manifold where it meets with the swirl flap actuator, and there's essentially a boost leak. Now there is a seal that does like to blow, and there is really no replacement seal for it. So a cheap, quick, easy fix is to just do the swirl flap delete, like I'm going to be doing today. But like I said, I don't really recommend it if it does not need doing, because you will in fact lose some performance, you will lose some low down torque, and you will lose a slight, you will have a slight decrease in your MPG. Don't try and argue it. It is tried and tested. I have done this process myself. Now on average, I noticed that I lost around 5 MPG, and I did actually notice a significant loss in low down torque. Now with that being said, obviously with the swirl flaps deleted, you are ensuring that you're essentially never going to run into any problems with them. So it's kind of one of those things where once it's done, you don't have to worry about. But with that being said, it all depends on whether or not you can live with the loss in the performance. Long term, it's something that I really couldn't live with. But if you don't drive around doing less than 2000 RPM on a regular basis, then you probably won't even notice the difference at all, if I'm honest. Now the only other option you have when you have these problems with the swirl flap or with the intake manifold itself, aside from doing the swirl flap delete kit, is essentially just buying a brand new intake manifold, which obviously is a very costly part direct from BMW, talking somewhere in the region of £600 to £800. So you obviously have to weigh up the cost factor as well. Now with that being said, I do understand that there are some people that still want to do the swirl flap delete, and this is the video that I'm going to show you exactly how to do it. So I've actually been sent the swirl flap delete kit from Darkside Development. You guys know that I have worked with them in the past. They provided the EGR delete kit. They've also provided the wheel stud conversion, and their quality of their products is really top notch. I haven't had any issues with them at all. And if you do want to purchase this swirl flap delete kit, there will of course be a link down in the description box below, and if you use code George Osters, then you will in fact get free shipping on, I believe it's on any products. Don't quote me on that, but yeah, I don't make anything out of that. I don't get any commission or anything. It's just a way that I can help you guys out. But yeah, I hope you guys appreciate that, and I think we'll get outside now and let's get cracking. Okay then, so here is a look at the engine bay. Now bear in mind, this is the 5 series, so if you have the 1 or the 3 series, it may look a little bit different, but the process is pretty much the same. Now because I'm going to be unplugging a whole load of different electrical connectors and unplugging the ECU as well, I'm actually going to go ahead and disconnect the negative terminal on the battery just as a safety measure. So let's go to the trunk. Okay then, so once you are in the trunk, all you need to do is locate the battery, and on this 5 series it is in the right hand side. If you have the 1 or the 3 series, you may or may not have it in the center, replacing the spare wheel well. But all we need to do is remove that 10mm nut, and then the negative terminal can be removed from the battery. There we go, that's the negative terminal disconnected. Now then, at this point, if you do not have a physical lock in your tailgate, then I would not recommend closing your boot, but if you do, then it is okay to do so. Okay then, so first thing is first, in the engine bay I'm just going to go ahead and remove the engine cover, so obviously the main engine cover. Then I'm also going to go ahead and remove this front cover here as well. It's actually not necessary to remove this, but it's actually going to give me a little bit better access to the charge air pipe down at the bottom of the intercooler. It's just held in by those two screws. And now we have the engine cover off, I thought it would actually be a good idea to point out the issue that I'm having with the intake manifold. So I'm not having an issue with the swirl flaps or with the swirl flap rod. The issue that I'm having is a boost leak from the front here. So where the intake manifold meets the swirl flap actuator, I'm actually getting a lot of oil and soot come out of there. That is obviously from the EGR system and from the crankcase ventilation system. But yeah, if you do notice any soot or oil residue around here, there is a good chance that your intake manifold is leaking. Next thing I'm going to do then is remove the cabin air filter boxes. And then also the entire scuttle panel as well. Along with this piece of weather stripping. That's that side out. And that's this side out. And then you're going to want to remove the strut brace. There we go, that can be removed now. And I can go ahead and remove the sound deadening as well. And now is the tedious process of disconnecting a whole bunch of different electrical connectors and piping. Now my plan is to just disconnect everything this side of the intake manifold. On previous occasions when I've removed the intake manifold, I've actually removed everything this side, but I'm actually going to attempt to do it on this side today. So it will mean unplugging the ECU from this box here and feeding all these through. But I think there should be a little bit less on this side compared to that side, so yeah, we'll see how it goes anyway. Okay then, so I'll just give you a quick little update as to how I'm doing so far, making good progress. So obviously the charge air pipe is disconnected from the anti-shudder valve, and then I've also had to disconnect the ambient air temperature sensor. That comes off there very easily. Then what I've done is disconnected the main power cable that goes to the alternator, just so I can access a couple of clips down there a little bit easier. So there is one plug that goes to the alternator, then there is a couple more plugs as well. This one goes down to the aircon compressor, that needs to be disconnected. Then what I've done is loosened up this branch on top. There's just two 10mm bolts holding that in place, and a small screw here at the front. I've also disconnected the swirl flap actuator and the fuel rail as well. And I think that's pretty much everything that I've done. Oh, I've disconnected this here from the back. It's just held in by a couple of clips that just is pushed into the intake manifold. So I'm pretty confident now that all that is holding these branch cables in place, you know, preventing us from removing the intake manifold, is just inside of the ECU box. So what I'm going to do is remove the lid and then follow these back and disconnect them directly from the ECU, and then we should be able to essentially fold all this over and then have access to the main bolts on the intake manifold. This lid should now come off. There we go. Okay then, so we are in the main ECU box, and first thing I'm going to do is just pull these up out of here and here. Then what we need to do is trace these cables back to their plugs and then just disconnect them. Okay then, so next thing you're going to want to do is actually lift the ECU up itself, and then there is these connectors on the side. You have to pull these out from the side, then you can remove the main connector. As you can see, there's two, and with them off there's just a couple more connections down there that I need to chase, but shouldn't be too difficult. And with those couple of connectors unplugged, this entire thing can now be lifted off and across there. And now it is time to remove all 5 of the intake manifold bolts. They are 10mm. They shouldn't be tight, they should only be like 10 Newton meters or so. We'll go ahead and remove them all now. Now I'm going to attempt to remove the manifold itself. There we go. Now, as you saw, that came away pretty easily. I've actually had this intake manifold off before. Yours will more than likely not come away that easily. Main things to notice is that you need to ensure that all of the bolts are actually out of the bolt holes on the engine, because they do like to fall back in. So if I was to give you a quick tip, is to hold all 5 bolts out and away, and it should actually come away a lot easier. Then you may have to yank it back and forth, but don't worry, you're not going to break anything. As long as you have all of the electrical connectors out of the way, you should be good. But let's remove this fully now. And I need to be careful because there is an electrical connector on the underside that goes to the anti-shudder valve. There we go then, we have the anti-shudder valve disconnected and the intake manifold can be fully removed. And what I've done is just gave this area a good clean up and plugged the intake ports with some tissue paper just to prevent anything from falling down there. Now, it would actually be a good opportunity to clean your intake ports if they are particularly dirty. I've actually done that previously though, so mine are very, very clean for a diesel. But now we can move on to the intake manifold itself. Okay then, so here we have the intake manifold itself, and I'll actually show you where my issue lies. As you can see around here, it is very oily and sooty, and that should not be like that. That is actually the outside of the intake manifold. All of the soot and the oil should be on the inside. So if you find out that your intake manifold is full of oil and soot, it's completely normal. The soot will be coming from the EGR, which enters from this pipe here, and the oil just comes into the air intake system from the crankcase ventilation. Now what I'll show you then is just how much play I have in the rod itself. So obviously the rod goes from the actuator all the way to the other end of the intake manifold, and it holds the swirl flaps themselves in place. So if I just grab the end swirl flap, give that a shake, you can see there is actually a little bit of play in that rod now, and it's actually increased from the last time I removed this intake manifold. So yeah, this does need attention now, I would say, before it eventually does fail completely. But let's get on to the removal of the swirl flaps then. So first thing you need to do is just remove the swirl flap actuator, which is held in by these 3 screws here. I believe they are T30. So first thing we'll do is get those removed. Yep, T30. There we go. That's the actuator removed. As you can see, very oily. And there is the arm removed as well. That seems quite loose. Next thing we need to do then is remove this lever which controls the rod itself. So to do that, I'm just going to fold this clip out of the way, which holds it in place. I should then be able to pull this off. And because this lever is actually still attached to the rod, I just need to give this a good pull and the rod should then come with it, or not. So it looks like this has came off of the rod, and I'm going to have to use some grips on the end of this rod and then just slide the whole thing out. So here I just have some vice grips. Just going to grip it on the rod. I'm just going to need to give this a good firm pull. And there we go. And there's the rod removed. And now all that's left to do is physically remove the swirl flaps and any carriers that hold these swirl flaps in place. Now it's very important to make sure that you remove everything that can be removed, because you don't want any plastic falling inside of your engine, because obviously that can cause, you know, a lot of damage. So you need to make sure that you removed everything from here. There we go, that's one removed. So two removed. That's three removed. And we finally got the fourth one removed. Now what I need to do is, like I said, make sure we remove any excess plastic that may be holding these swirl flaps in place, and then it should be pretty much done for the removal of the swirl flaps. And then what we can do is remove the anti-shudder valve. It's just held in by 3 bolts, and then we can go ahead and empty all of our pieces out. So there's all 4 swirl flaps, and we just have random pieces left over from these carriers. And then once you are confident that you have everything removed, like I said, you do not want to leave any of this inside your intake manifold, because if it falls down your intake ports, it will cause massive damage to your valves and your pistons. Once you've done that, you can then go ahead and reinstall the anti-shudder valve. And now it is time to start installing the actual kit. Now then, let's take a look at the kit itself and see what is included. So first of all, we have the bung. Now this bung sits on the end of the intake manifold, in between the manifold itself and the swirl flap actuator. It sits in place of the lever and also the rod itself, and then it is wedged in place by the actuator. Now we also have a fresh set of gaskets for the intake manifold. So we have this one here, which is for the anti-shudder valve, so that sits in between the anti-shudder valve and the intake manifold. And then we have the 4 main intake manifold gaskets, which are obviously these 4 right here. Now if this intake manifold was going back on the car, then obviously I would go ahead and install these gaskets, but because I'm not reinstalling this intake manifold back on the car, I'm not going to go ahead and use these. Okay then, so when it comes to installing the bung itself, then all you need to do is just push it in place. And then there is actually a small top to the bung as well. You just have to push that in place. Then you can go ahead and reinstall the actuator with the 3 screws. And once you have the actuator positioned back in place, you should find that it has a nice tight seal between the actuator and the bung itself. And there we go then, it should look a little something like this. And then all that would left to be done is get this thing reinstalled back on the car. Okay then, so that's the swirl flap delete done. Like I said, I'm not actually going to be reinstalling this intake manifold back into the car. I actually have something else planned for that. But I hope this video has been somewhat helpful. I hope it's been easy enough to kind of follow along step by step. I hope you've learned something. Of course, if you do want to purchase this swirl flap delete kit from Darkside Developments, there will be the link down in the description box below. I want to thank all of you for watching. Please give this video a like, leave a comment down below, subscribe if you have not already done so, because I've got a lot more videos to come on this car, and I will see you all in that next one. Peace!